The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, folks, to today's webinar, Digital Transformation, Sustainable Construction and Operations. Today is exciting because we've got two really smart gentlemen on today's call, and I think we're going to have a really good and educational session with a fun Q&A at the end. I'm your host, Evan Hill. You've probably seen my face. I may be a familiar face if you listen to the Connecting Construction podcast or listen to any of our other webinars. Elliot, you can jump to the next screen. I'm going to give you guys a couple of quick housekeeping items before we jump right in and waste no time. So right off the bat, thank you for attending today. I know everybody's busy during the pandemic and everybody's working from home, so meetings are stacking up, and we're just grateful you took the time, an hour out of your day to listen in and hopefully take something of value out of today's conversation and Q&A session. On the right side of your screen, hopefully you see a GoToWebinar panel. You should see a questions tab. So like I said, we have a Q&A session at the end, and the way we do Q&A sessions is none of this is scripted. So if you want to throw me a curveball, throw Rick a curveball, throw Elliot a curveball. Actually, don't throw me a curveball. Throw one of those two a curveball. I will make sure to get it in there. It is first come, first serve. That's what I will say. So if you're thinking of a question throughout the webinar and it comes to mind, ask it immediately. There's no other way around that. So second item, it is being recorded today. So if you have to leave halfway through, that's fine. It will be available on demand. And finally, we will send you a certificate of participation and completion for today's webinar that will come in your email. With that said, I am going to introduce our guests, and Elliot, you can jump to the next screen. We've got Elliot Jones, who is a product manager at Trimble, a peer of mine, super smart, intelligent guy, and then Rick Niederstadt. It's one of those two. It may have been. Okay, it may have been the second one. I definitely psyched myself out there. Who's the Capital Program Support Manager from Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewer District. Super grateful we got you on the webinar today, Rick. But I'm going to stop talking for a little bit and let you both introduce yourselves, your professional backgrounds, and why you're here today. And Elliot, I'm actually going to start with you.
Sounds good. Nice to meet everyone today. Elliot Jones. I am the product manager for eBuilder and Project Site, which is our GC focus tool. I specifically focus on our mobile solutions. In terms of sustainability, this is an area of interest for me. I won't claim to be an interest or won't claim to be an expert, unlike Rick. He's the real expert today. But I do see this area as being something that I think is critical for the success of our industry. It's an area I'm actively researching. I'm trying to learn as much as I can, and I think our industry over the next 5 to 10 years needs to start embracing these concepts of sustainability, resilience, and overall just modernizing our industry. I guess a personal note: I am from Ireland, and that's it for me. I'll go up to you, Rick.
Hi guys. Good morning and good afternoon, depending
Rick,
on.
Let me just jump in real quick. One of the core reasons we brought Elliot on today's webinar is because his accent is a joy to listen to. So I wanted to make that super clear. Rick, I'm sorry to cut you off. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
No worries. So I am Rick Niederstadt. I am the Capital Program Support Manager at the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District. I've been in the industry something along the line of like 25 years or so. I started out in private consulting and then moved into construction management for the sewerage district, and then now in the role of Capital Program Support Manager. So we have a pretty significant annual capital improvement program that we manage and administer, and you're going to hear a little bit about today as some of our sustainability initiatives.
Great. Thank you both again for taking the time to chat and have a conversation today. So I think the way this is going to work is, Elliot, you're going to give a short little educational, I think, I don't know what the right word is, but a little educational lecture. I think it's going to be really engaging. And then Rick, you're going to go into your side of the house, and then I think we'll end on a Q&A. So like I said, please ask questions right side of your screen. the little questions tab, get them in throughout the webinar, and we will go first come, first serve. So with that said, Elliot, I'm going to hand it off to you. Rick, you and I can go on mute and turn our cameras off, but we'll come back when it's time for you, Rick.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Evan. So like Evan said, I'm going to start kind of at a high level. I want to talk about what sustainability is, what it means for the wider construction industry, and then Rick is going to take us home with some examples as to how they're implementing that in MMSD. Okay, so in terms of the case for sustainability and why it's important, so the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has stated that we need to keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this is above pre-industrial averages. And the reason this is important and why it's kind of really sunk in for me is if we surpass that 1.5 degrees Celsius mark, we're basically going to move into a domino effect where it's going to be harder and harder to manage climate change temperature rises after that. So one example that's kind of stands out for me is, and I was watching a documentary on this recently, was the Ross Sea ice shelf in Antarctica. So huge ice shelf that is melting because of global temperature rise. And what's going to happen if we get to that 1.5 degree mark is that ice shelf acts as a carbon barrier. It's trapping a huge amount of carbon below it. So when fish die, when animals die below that, their bodies decompose and that carbon needs to go somewhere. And right now it's getting blocked by that ice shelf. So if we hit this 1.5 degree mark, that's going to melt away. And then we're going to hit that domino effect. So it's going to get harder and harder to maintain at that point. So where are we currently in this metric? So it's estimated that we've hit about 1 degrees Celsius rise already above those pre-industrial averages. So we really don't have a huge amount of wiggle room here. So we need to start to act as an industry, as a collective global community. So that's kind of the why, I guess. But I do think we can't just look at this purely from an altruistic standpoint. We have to look at what the economic benefit to our industry, to our global industries is. And if we look at the economic benefit here of a low carbon future, it's estimated to be about 26 trillion by 2030, which is compared to staying on the current high carbon pathway. So that includes both the impacts of climate change, so rising insurance costs, property damage, having to build more resilient to basically to outlast some of these impacts of climate change. But it also includes the economic benefit and the opportunities that will arise through sustainability. And I think that's the area that I really want to focus on, because if we can present this as not just a warning signs, but also that there's a huge economic opportunity here for our industry, for the industries we serve. So one example of that is the rise of ESG investing. ESG, or environmental, social, and governance, is an asset class of shares. It's one of the fastest growing asset classes out there. And from a very personal perspective, Trimble was added to the S&P 500 this year, which is a huge achievement for us. And one of the reasons for that, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons is we're highly rated for ESG. We're on a lot of ESG ETFs, and we promote ourselves as a leader in the space. And that has been a huge driver in our shareholder growth and in us getting added to the S&P 500. Looking across the wider S&P, there was a study out recently that suggested that companies on the S&P 500, and for anyone who's not from the US, the S&P is some of the largest shares corporations in the US. And there was a study recently that said companies on the S&P who are rated highly in ESG outperform their peers who aren't by about 77%. So purely from a shareholder and Wall Street sense, there's massive economic benefits to being rated highly in this area. Okay, so how do we keep temperature rise below 1.5 degrees? And the industries that we serve, the way to do that is pretty similar. We need to halve emissions by 2030, half again by 2040, and ultimately achieve net zero in 2050. All right, so some of the sustainabilities we are faced with in the built environment are as follows. I'm going to dive into these in a little bit of detail. But our industry in the wider built environment can play a leading role in how we transition to a sustainable future by reducing carbon emissions and overall emissions, and transitioning to a more circular economy, circular industry. So if we look at some of the impacts here, so let's start with emissions. So the building and construction industry accounts for 39% of total carbon emissions. So almost 40% of total carbon emitted into the atmosphere comes from construction, comes from the built environment. So we all know our industry can be, as to say it gently, change adverse, slow to change. The issue with that from a sustainability standpoint is if construction doesn't adopt sustainability, if it doesn't start to move in that direction, our global communities are never going to reach our net zero targets because of that. 40% of carbon emissions is coming from the built environment and the construction industry. But what that also means from a more positive standpoint is if the built environment starts to move in that direction, we can have a massive impact on our sustainability goals. All right, so looking at energy usage, so the built environment accounts for 70% of total electricity consumed in the US, and worldwide that's about 30 to 40% of primary energy usage. If we factor in population growth and urbanization trends, the construction industry will need to build an expected 13,000 buildings every day. For serial builders, that's great, but from a sustainability impact, that's going to be difficult because now we're starting to compound the issues faced around carbon emissions, etc. So the main point I want to kind of everyone to take away here is that we do need to start building less, but that doesn't mean not building at all. That means starting to build more accurately. We need to use the assets we have, etc. So that's going to be a running theme in what I talk about today. All right, so moving on to raw materials. So half of all extracted raw materials are used in the construction sector. And then if we look at waste, so the volume of construction waste generated worldwide annually is expected to nearly double by 2025 to 2.2 billion tons. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, everyone's favorite term, rework. This is a huge problem for our industry, where it's estimated that between 7 and 11% of total construction costs are wasted in rework. This is a problem we need to tackle in our industry, but it's also a huge sustainability problem as well. So if we look at let's say, material product that's been produced, it's been transported to site and probably globally as well, it's on site, it has to be installed. And then if we find out later that that was the wrong material installed, if it was installed incorrectly, we have to strip it down, we have to transport it to a landfill site, and then we need to start the process again, producing that material, getting it to site, reinstalling it. That has a huge economic impact to our projects, but also has a massive sustainability impact. And if we look at, I guess, the kind of big rocks that our industry is going to face, rework is one of them, modernization, the digital transformation of our industry. All of these kind of large initiatives are really tied to sustainability. We need to start building more accurately. We need to embrace technology, and we need to reduce rework. So if we want to move in a more sustainable direction, we don't have to throw out all of these initiatives that we're currently working on. They're all aligned to sustainability and building more resiliently. Okay, so how do we do this? What does moving to a more sustainable industry looks like? So there was a report released recently. It was called the Exponential Roadmap, and it's a roadmap towards net zero. So it looks like some of the biggest industries out there. It was composed by a multidisciplinary team representing academia, businesses, NGOs, and it presents a pathway for how our major industries can achieve net zero through exponential changes. It requires some significant changes in order to meet our UN recommendations for how we minimize global warming. And this includes, like we've talked about, reducing emissions by 50% by 2030, again by 2040, and ultimately achieving net zero in 2050. And if we look at the construction industry itself, what are some of the big rocks, the big initiatives that we need to tackle? Starting left to right, we need to double our retrofitting total. So I mentioned reusing the assets we currently have versus building new. This is a core component of sustainability. If we can look at the assets we have available, if we can design ways to retrofit what we have versus knocking and rebuilding completely new, that's going to be key to sustainability. It's also aligned to monetary, to financial benefits as well, where if we're designing in a way that incorporates retrofitting, we can look at extending the life cycle of that asset. We can look at extending the life of that asset, and then what the potentials are for retrofitting that once it's past the initial life cycle of what it's been designed for. That in theory could advance the resale potential of the asset as well, or it can be transitioned into something else. We also need to reduce energy use during operation, so embracing low energy use appliances, smarter appliances, etc. We need to embrace low carbon heating and cooling. That's going to have a huge impact. And we also need to reduce demand for building space. There's a lot of talk right now about what the return to the office looks like. And a lot of companies are talking about balancing working from home with working from the office and embracing concepts like hot desking, etc. That concept is really aligned to sustainability as well, because we're using the assets we have in a much more efficient and effective way. So we need to scale that much more broadly as well. So one example could be the coffee shop. So a coffee shop is only in operation from, let's say, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. What's that asset used for after that? So if we can use that more effectively, so let's say we have the coffee shop transition to a bar, to a hipster cocktail bar after that. So you're using that same asset for two different purposes, and you're reducing demand for building space because of that. And then the last one is low carbon construction. So embracing electric vehicles on site, reducing waste, reducing toxic emissions, and moving to net zero construction as well is going to be critical to our success here. All right, so how do we go about transitioning the building sector? So if we start with policy, so I'm going to go left to right here. Countries, cities, companies, we all need strong policies and programs to halve our carbon emissions in the building stock that's necessary. So we need to halve emissions in our current building stock. And then these solutions must scale rapidly as well. So a lot of the people on this call are going to be owners. So as owners, we need to start to transition to requiring sustainability in our projects. We need to get sustainability built into our RFPs. We need to work with vendors, architects who have a history of sustainability, who are factoring that into their design decisions. We need to start to request sustainability. We need to request resilience as well, so we can extend our assets, so we can use what we have, etc. So it really starts at the top of the pyramid, as well as from the bottom as well. So we need to meet in the middle. We also need new procurement practices for construction and renovation. These should require dramatically improved energy and carbon emission standards. And then, like I mentioned, we need a critical mass of companies in the construction and the facility management industries to become true climate leaders. The likes of Rick out there, who have a history of demonstrating this, and have also connected the altruistic need for this with financial benefit to their organizations as well. And we need to drive emission cuts through our value chains and setting an example for others to follow. We also need, we talked on this, new low carbon business models for sharing space, and smart buildings must scale globally to achieve economies of scale. And our businesses must be open to new economic models that take advantage of sharing space. We touched on that as well. And then funding. So I think this is going to be a critical part of this transition. Funding should be allocated, and this is already starting to happen. It should be allocated based on sustainable retrofitting and construction, perhaps through the use of green bonds. And I think this is in itself is going to be one of the major drivers for our industry to start to move to more sustainable practices. So to use the old adage, if we follow the money, if that money starts to transition, and we talked about how it is on the financial markets, construction being such a capital intensive industry, if the access to capital is now being tied up in sustainability, if you need to access capital, you need to demonstrate the sustainability impacts of what you're designing. And I think we are seeing this through some of the infrastructure bill here in the US, where a lot of that has been connected to sustainability, and access to capital will be tied up in demonstrating sustainability as well. All right, and then solutions in the sector should be standardized and scalable around the world, rather than dispersed and fragmented. So again, another major problem in our industry is the fragmentation of practices, technology, etc. We need to start to standardize and connect the solutions we're providing. And then lastly, so from I as a technology provider here, we need moonshot thinking. We need exponential strategies inspired by Moore's Law to reach the Paris Agreement. So as a technology provider, we need to provide a pathway for our customers, our users, to embrace sustainability and do it in a way that's aligned to the financial benefit for their organization. And we need to make that easy for them to make that switch. especially in construction where it's such a massive industry and can be slow to change. All right, so what does a sustainable project look like? So again, it really starts with capital planning. So access to capital planning in accordance with sustainable construction policies and frameworks. So we're already seeing this in the EU, where they've just released, I believe the framework is called the Levels Framework, where it starts to outline what sustainable projects should look like and how to start to achieve these. So this will start to roll out into North America as well, but it is happening across the world right now. And then we move into conceptual design. So we need to design based on maximizing available assets versus demolition and rebuilds. And we need to design to maximize the asset lifespan and the reuse potential. So what can we use it for in the future? How can we avoid that being demolished and having to be rebuilt? In the design and engineering, we need to utilize life cycle assessment, LCA principles, to select materials based on designs based on having the lowest carbon impacts. So LCA looks at all of the materials we use and evaluates them based on their carbon impact across the entire life cycle of the project, from conception to demolition. We also need to look at just-in-time material procurement to minimize unused or excessive materials. We need to source our materials locally to reduce the transport emissions, etc. And then in scheduling and portfolio and project management, so really where eBuilder and project site plays, we ultimately just need to build smarter. We need to embrace technology such as 5D BIM, 5D BIM-based project and construction management to improve our overall efficiency and minimize rework. We also need to have a platform that will allow for sustainability, that will start to connect design or LCA into how we manage the asset and then how we construct it as well. So another major initiative that is ongoing, that's really connected to sustainability, is modular prefabricated construction. We need to start to embrace this. We need to have modular objects that are based on having the lowest carbon impact. So using LCA and the modular prefabricated objects we're using as well. And these modular objects need to consider reuse potential as well. They need to be able to be transitioned to different usage of the application, etc. So prefabrication is going to be key to sustainability. And then in the construction phase itself, so minimizing embodied carbon, which is the carbon emitted in the construction phase, by utilizing smarter electric plant equipment, reducing rework by embracing BIM, by embracing technology as a whole, in constructing mostly modular prefabricated objects where possible. All right, and lastly, in the facility management and the end of life of the asset, so we need to extend our asset lifespan by maximizing the reuse potential as well as space sharing techniques. We also need to maintain that asset more effectively by continuing the usage of technology such as BIM to more effectively manage the asset and continuing that lifespan and meeting the intended lifespan, or even extending that where we can. All right, so that is it. There was a lot to cover there, but I'm going to now hand it over to Rick, and he's going to give an example of how they're currently using it for his projects. So I'm going to
Thank you so much for that, Elliot. The one thing I'll jump in and say is we already have a ton of questions. So,
do we want to pause for questions?
If you know, I want to save this for the end.
Okay.
All I'll say is if you have questions, please get them in now. If you have any hope or wishes of getting those answered. So
yeah, there was a lot to cover there.
Rick, is this your screen or are you good?
Yes, it should be my screen, yep.
All right, we will go off camera and let you do your thing, and we'll come back when you're done.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Evan and Elliot. So Elliot talked a lot about sustainability in general and the things that the industry and the world, quite frankly, needs to do to become more sustainable. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about sustainability initiatives at the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District. So a little primer on the MMSD and what we do. We serve about 1.1 million people in Milwaukee and 28 surrounding communities. We're a regional governmental entity. We have something on the order of about 300 miles of metropolitan interceptor sewer that takes wastewater from the local municipality sewer systems. We have 32 miles of deep tunnel storage, ranging in diameter from 17 to 32 feet in diameter, and all told that can hold upwards of 521 million gallons of stormwater and wastewater. We have two 300 million gallon per day capacity water reclamation facilities, and our service area is approximately 350 square miles in and around Milwaukee. So we have a pretty significant capital program. Much of that is focused in the 4 bullet areas you see there, right? Our 2 relatively large water reclamation facilities, our conveyance network. We also do quite a lot of work in the water course and flood management arena, as well as green infrastructure. We started doing green infrastructure work quite a while ago now, and it's a pretty significant component of what we do. Right, the vision and the mission of MMSD is on the screen on the right there, and those really drive goals for our organization. Within our organization's 2035 vision, we have a wide number of goals, but some of them that are I'll speak to relative to this particular webinar are zero sewer overflows. So as said, we have a pretty significant service area. That consists of both a separate sewer area and a combined sewer area. And our ultimate goal here is to not have any overflows at any time, regardless of the size of a particular storm event, right? That's a pretty monumental goal, especially as storms get, more significant, more intense, so on and so forth. We have a number of structures that currently exist within the FEMA 100-year floodplain. One of our goals is to make sure that we don't have any structures in the 100-year floodplain, because obviously when we have a 100-year flood event, those structures are at risk. Another huge significant goal for us, and it relates very much to green infrastructure, is to manage the first ½ inch of rainfall where it falls. And if you look at the math there related to our service area, a ½ inch of rainfall over the Milwaukee area translates to 740 million gallons. If you remember what I said earlier, we have a deep tunnel system that can store 521 million gallons, but we're looking to get green infrastructure built that can manage even more than that. A couple other sustainable goals that we have are to meet 100% of our energy needs with renewable energy sources, and then also meet 80% of our energy needs with internal renewable energy sources. So those particular energy sources that we actually own, operate, and develop ourselves. So a lot of our projects, especially the ones I'm going to talk about today, obviously relate to sustainability. The UN has a list of 17 sustainable development goals, which they call, as you see there, 17 goals to transform our world. A lot of the projects we do very directly relate to a number of those sustainable development goals, specifically number 6, which is clean water and sanitation, number 7, which is affordable and clean energy, right? And numbers 13, 14, and 15, right? Climate action, life below water, our waterways, lakes and rivers and streams, things of that nature, as well as life on land. And then indirectly with what, the things we do, our overall initiatives and our projects, we obviously do look at some of these goals from an indirect perspective as well. So, lots of things are sustainable that you might not even otherwise think of as being sustainable, and just by the nature of what you're doing, right, they are. So challenges associated with sustainability, and right on the top there, clearly sustainability isn't easy. All of you guys that are on the webinar here, you're in your own organizations, right? There might be another wastewater agency out there, but there's plenty of other people out there that are from entirely different industries, entirely different commercial, private or governmental entities, right? You need to figure out how to build sustainability into the culture of your organization. As a sewerage district, before sustainability became a buzzword, we were certainly doing things that were sustainable, but traditionally our industry is what I would call a gray industry, right? We're the type of industry that typically thinks in the world of concrete, steel, pipes, buildings, that sort of thing. And we really needed to look at, how do we want to build more sustainability into our culture, and then obviously make decisions based on sustainability and things of that nature. Resource limitations is a challenge for all kinds of things, not just sustainability, but as an organization moves to try and be more sustainable, right, you may be starting down the path of different initiatives, right? Those different initiatives take people's time and effort to advance. And that's obviously a critical factor in being able to implement sustainable operations, sustainable projects, is simply having the people and the time to do so. Acceptance of new and different approaches obviously is a pretty significant undertaking. Again, I'll speak about the industry that we're in. I mentioned it's typically a gray industry. A lot of people that have been in this industry, they need to really see the reasons that sustainable projects do have a benefit, right? Because they're used to, I need a bigger sewer, I need more wastewater storage, I need a larger wastewater treatment plant, I need a wider freeway, whatever the case may be, right? We have to get people to start looking at things through a different lens and understand that there are different approaches to solving some of these problems. And then again, this is certainly not specific to sustainability, but change is hard. And if your organization is used to doing things a certain way, and they've been doing it that way for a very long time, right? Changing how you go about thinking about things, changing about how you go about your business processes and your business practices can certainly be difficult, right? And that's also very true of sustainability. And then, I think lastly here, relative to some of the challenges, sustainability is obviously a huge thing. It's a significant buzzword, but generally speaking, our initiatives and our projects are small, right? And this is one of those areas where I'd say, how do you eat an elephant? I'm sure you've all heard that saying. It's one bite at a time, right? We certainly have big goals. We know they're big goals. They're going to be difficult to achieve, and we're only going to achieve them by, making incremental small progress towards those goals. There aren't a lot of, single one-off projects that are going to single-handedly allow us to meet our goals, right? So, this takes a batch of projects, a batch of initiatives, and a lot of work to get these things done. So how do we implement sustainability here at the MMSD? There's a lot to unpack here, and I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but within all of our projects and in all of our initiatives, we obviously are taking a triple bottom line approach to those sorts of things, right? Some people will call that, social, economic, and environment. I kind of like the picture that's on the top on the right of the screen there, which is 3 Ps, right? It's people, planet, and prosperity. It's all the same stuff, but we have to consider all of those things as related to our initiatives and our projects, right? And with respect to projects, we certainly have a finite amount of funding available to build new things, to retrofit existing equipment, so on and so forth. So we really need to prioritize those projects in consideration of the goals of the organization. So, having a system that allows us to look at the various components of the triple bottom line and analyze that information and have quantitative data to use that helps us prioritize those projects is really important. And within our system, we really do take an asset management based approach to prioritizing projects. And that's not just for assets that presently exist, that's for assets that we don't yet have, right? So you look in the bottom right of the screen and you see the matrix that I'm sure many of you have seen before, with likelihood of failure on one axis and consequence of failure on another, right? You could be, your project or your initiative is going to fit somewhere in that matrix, right? And you really obviously want to focus the vast majority of your time, effort, and money on those items that squarely reside in the red boxes, because that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, right? It's not that things in the green boxes aren't important, but clearly they're not going to have as much impact on achieving your goals as the ones that have a, high consequence of failure and a high likelihood of failure. And in our organization, what we look at, from the perspective of those metrics and how we score projects related, to prioritization, is we look at things like permit compliance. How will this project improve our ability to meet our permits or maintain our ability to meet permit compliance, so on and so forth. How does our project or our initiative impact the environment? How does it impact the amount of energy that we currently use? How does it impact the type of energy that we currently use, right? Those are all related to our 2035 goals, right? So energy, environment, permit compliance, all critically important items as related to the projects and initiatives that we move forward within our organization. Similarly, obviously we're a government organization, so profit isn't necessarily a driver, but customer implications in terms of the ratepayer are critically important, right? So, everything we do costs money, and all of that money is coming from our ratepayers, right? So we want to make sure that the projects and the initiatives that we are putting forth and spending resources on do have great value to the ratepayers of the organization. And then also we're obviously looking at safety and the overall management effectiveness of the organization as it relates to our projects and our initiatives and our overall financing plan and so on and so forth. So from our projects and initiatives, we are looking at all of our goals and their impacts across the organization to score them and prioritize them so that we know we are spending our money on projects that are advancing us towards our goals in the most efficient and effective manner possible. So how are we doing towards achieving our goals? On the earlier slide, I showed what some of our goals are. This is going to show you, where we are at with achieving those goals. Sanitary sewer overflows, we don't want to have any. In 2020, we had 2. Right? I don't remember specifically if those were due to incredibly heavy rainfall events or equipment malfunction, but it doesn't really matter, right? We had 2 and we don't want to have any. So we have a little ways to go in achieving that goal. We don't want to have any combined sewer overflows, right? In 2020, we had 2 of those as well. And again, that's a pretty low number for those of you that are familiar with this industry, and specifically for those of you that are familiar with combined sewer areas, that's pretty good. In fact, that's better than most of the similar agencies of our type, in the country. We don't want to have 0 homes. We do want to have 0 homes in the 100-year floodplain. We've removed 2,535 structures to date that were in the 100-year floodplain. We have 1,263 of them to go. So again, we have a ways to go, but we also have time to achieve that goal. We want to acquire 10,000 additional acres of river buffers through our Green Seams program. And basically that program allows us to purchase land that abuts rivers and streams within our region and keeps that land with an easement such that it can never be developed. And so it will always be there to be useful in terms of filtering out runoff from storms, from farm fields, so on and so forth, right? We want to capture the first ½ inch of rainfall across our sewer service area, and we have that goal of 740 million gallons. This is, we're taking bites of that elephant. We're doing actually pretty good towards that goal. We've only got 37.1 million gallons to date, but we haven't been working towards that ultimate goal for all that long. So while we have quite a ways to go, we have a roadmap to get there, and we're well on our way. A bigger one is, and perhaps a little bit more challenging, is harvesting the first ¼ gallon per square foot of service area. In that, we have a goal, we want to harvest 630 million gallons. As of now, we've got systems in place to do that for 4.6 million gallons. And as far as energy goes, we're at 26.9% of our goal, with meeting 100% of our energy need with renewable energy sources, and then meeting 80% of that with internal renewable sources. So what does that look like in terms of real world projects? So this is a picture of both our service area on the left and our Jones Island Water Reclamation Facility on the right. And the what I guess you'd call that pink and black checkered line there, is a landfill gas pipeline that we own and operate. And that landfill gas pipeline takes landfill gas that's generated at a landfill and transmits it after treatment all the way up to our water reclamation facility, where we burn it in, we compress it into a higher pressure, and then we burn it in landfill gas turbines to create electrical energy, which we use at our treatment plant. So the this picture that you see here, that is our landfill gas powerhouse. It's got 3 turbines in it that can burn landfill gas, convert it into energy for the significant energy consumption that we do at the treatment plant. The building you see on the top of that picture is our Milwaukee facility. It's probably our oldest sustainable operation that we have. We make Milwaukee, which some of you may have heard about. It's a fertilizer used across the country for lawns and golf courses and so on and so forth. And I think next year we will have been making it for 100 years, right? So that's a hugely sustainable endeavor, because if we didn't turn that biosolid into something for beneficial reuse, we would have to landfill it, right? So that's material that's not going into a landfill, and it's doing a couple of things. One, it's providing revenue for the organization in terms of those sales, and it's saving landfill space. Right, a few other sustainability initiatives that are shown here but not necessarily called out is, again, treatment plants use a ton of power. On the top of this D&D facility here, we have I think it's about a 20 kilowatt solar array. And then obviously down here, which is one of our maintenance buildings, we have a bit of a small green roof on that particular structure, preventing, contaminated runoff from getting into the adjacent river. Oddly enough, because this is right on the shores of Lake Michigan, we do get all kinds of seagulls and nasty things that would be on top of this roof that is getting some filtering from the green roof. Similarly, over here in this particular building, which is in the lower corner, I hadn't even thought about this until I was looking this over earlier today. That's our process air compressor building. For those of you that are familiar with wastewater treatment, that's one of the biggest energy consumers of the treatment process, which is providing oxygen for the bugs that eat the waste. And we recently installed a much newer variable frequency drive for one of our main blowers in that system to allow us to meet only the demand for air that we have at that time, rather than creating using more energy to create more air than we actually need. This is our South Shore wastewater treatment facility. Some sustainability initiatives we have at this particular plant. We digest sludge at this treatment plant, so we use anaerobic digestion. We actually transfer sludge from our Jones Island plant down to this plant. This is the only of our plants that has digestion. We digest sludge that creates biogas. We store that biogas in those blue spheres you see on the picture there, and then we have a powerhouse at this particular facility as well that is converting that biogas into electricity via engine generators. One of the other sustainability initiatives that we're actually contemplating at this treatment plant is, as you see, there's a lot of green space available at this particular treatment plant, and we are looking at installing a much more significant solar array than we have at Jones Island, because we have space for it at this particular location. Some of our other sustainability initiatives really relate to green infrastructure, and this is the pictures that you see on the screen here are related to just a number of different types of green infrastructure. Top left is obviously a green roof. That's I think this is both a commercial and residential building in Milwaukee, and one of our programs provides funding for private entities to install sustainable green infrastructure as part of their construction. So this green roof was funded by the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District. It's keeping wastewater out of the system. As we move to the top right, this is one of our projects that actually harvests rainwater. The cast of characters you see on the screen there are putting in, I think, what are called aqua blocks. That's basically an underground cistern, and then as this place was finished, this is basically an urban farm site. So any of the rainwater that makes its way into the cistern is used to provide water for the urban farm that exists at the same location. Lower left is a permeable alley in the city of Milwaukee. So rather than just a straight up concrete alley, in the center of this alley, there's a lot of permeable pavers with a system underneath that obviously allows rainwater to be reabsorbed into the ground rather than run off and hit our combined sewer system. And then in the lower right, we have what we call a bioswale. And that bioswale, again, is taking runoff from adjacent areas, putting it through the bioswale where a vast majority of it can be sent back down into the groundwater after being, filtered and taken up by plants and trees and various native species. So, from a sustainability perspective, takeaways I would say is, for those of you that are, just starting on the path towards sustainability, or maybe you have a long way to go, maybe you haven't even thought about it yet, sustainability doesn't have to mean the same thing to everyone. Clearly, what it means for our organization, what it means for Trimble, or what it means for any other organization are going to be different, right? You're in a different industry, you have different goals, and sustainability is going to mean something different to your organization. And you really need to define what do you want it to be in your organization, and what does it look like in your organization, right? For us, it has a lot to do with capturing rainwater and keeping keeping our system in top-notch performance. For somebody else, it might mean I want LEED certified buildings, and I want Envision rated projects, or whatever the case may be. But to get somewhere on your path, you have to define your starting point, you have to define your goals, and you certainly have to understand what you can do to get there. So what is sustainability to you? What is it to your organization? And what can you do to improve it? Clearly, you got to have a vision, you got to have goals, and you have to understand that it's a significant undertaking, right? You will have to define incremental milestones, because clearly there's not going to be one initiative or one project that's going to get you from the start line all the way to the finish line, right? So there are incremental pieces and incremental steps that you're going to have to take, and then find ways to measure and monitor performance and progress towards achieving those goals. I showed you the slide earlier of where we're at, right? As you saw, we have a long way to go, but we know where we want to get to, and therefore we know what we still have to do to get there, and we have the ability to measure our progress towards those goals, so we can see how far we are away and how far we have yet to go. Decision-making processes, certainly, they need to consider the goals and the vision of your organization, right? You can't simply put a vision or a mission or goals out there and then do nothing to achieve them, right? So, make that vision, set those goals, set them with a lot of thought, and make sure that you subsequently make decisions that are based on those goals. And then, Elliot mentioned this earlier, sustainability does make financial sense, right? The projects that I showed you earlier, we didn't do those because they were sustainable or just because they were sustainable. We did them because they were sustainable and they made financial sense, right? We already have 521 million gallons of underground storage in our deep tunnel system. It would cost us oodles and oodles and oodles of money to create 740 million gallons more, right? It's far cheaper to capture that 740 million gallons by using green infrastructure than it is by building new tunnel storage. So with that, I'll give it up. We'll move over to the Q&A segment here, and we'll get after the questions.
That was jam-packed with depth. So thank you so much for that, Rick. That was super educational. We've got several good questions. We are less on time than I expected, so I think we have time for about 2 to 3 solid questions. I think the first one I'm going to throw your way, Elliot, and if you don't feel like you want to answer it, throw it back to Rick. That's something you can do. So I'm reading this. It says, if we have a 1.2 Celsius degree temperature increase since 2017, and the threshold for failure is 1.5, isn't there an exponential effect that puts us over the 1.5 threshold in no time, no matter what we do now?
All right, not pulling any punches there, Evan. That was a hard question.
I'm just the messenger. You don't shoot the messenger here.
Yeah. It's a great question. It's a tough question. I would say if you had asked me that same question a year ago, I would have a much more pessimistic outlook. But what I think I've seen over the last year is the pace of change here can be massive. And to just kind of build on to the last point that Rick added, that sustainability makes financial sense, that's going to cause very quick exponential changes. So one example to look at is the automotive industry. Especially here in the US, it fought sustainability, it fought electric vehicles for so long. Now you can't turn on your TV without seeing GM, Ford talking about electric vehicles. It almost changed overnight because consumer habits changed. Tesla came on the market, love them or hate them, they had a huge impact. And now overnight that industry has completely embraced sustainability. And in my lifetime now, I could see a place where all vehicles are electric. I never would have said that a year ago. So I think what we're seeing, and this will happen in construction as well, consumer habits are going to change, the access to funding is going to change, and then our industry is just going to have to overnight embrace that. So I would say in terms of the 1.5, and if we're at 1.2, yeah, that does make me nervous, but I think if we can continue to make these very rapid exponential changes, that will have an exponential impact on slowing down the rate as well. So it's going to be difficult to do it, but I'm going to stay optimistic for now.
Rick, do you want to jump in on that?
I think Elliot answered that one just fine. I'll let you move on to the next question.
All right, perfect. Rick, I'm going to throw this one your way, actually. Are you considering the circular economy, meaning the recycling of materials instead of sending them to a landfill? This is done in many European countries. The idea is that instead of seeing as refuse, it's seeing as having value.
Yes. So, in case in point, right, Milorganite, we beneficially reuse solids. So, people, whatever they send down our system comes to us, we treat it, and we don't send anything to the landfill in terms of solids from our treatment plants. All of that is recycled. So it's turned into Milorganite and off we go. So, and similarly, right, that's not the only area we look at that sort of perspective. Relative to taking homes and structures out of the floodplain, we don't just demolish them, we deconstruct them, right? And when they're deconstructed, the lumber is sent to be reused at other projects. Bricks are reused on other projects, so on and so forth. So yeah, wherever we can, we try to recycle, reuse, and extend the life of assets.
Great answer. This next one is going to be actually targeted to you both. Should the owner drive the sustainable conversation on construction projects, or should they rely on the general contractor? And Elliot, I'll let you go first.
Okay. Yeah, I think what's going to be the quickest change? I think if the owner is a leader in this space and says this is how it has to be done, if it's built into their RFP that their designers or architects have to design sustainably, if you have to have a history of doing that, I think that's going to be probably the quickest change, but I don't think they can do it by themselves. I think the entire industry has to embrace this. And if you're a GC in a project and your owner isn't talking about this, I think the GC has to ask and say, hey, are you considering this? What's your reuse potential? What are some of the materials you're using? Can we locally source this? And to just kind of layer on to the question about circular economy, I've worked with a GC partner recently who worked on a project in the Netherlands, and I believe they actually proposed this to the owner in this case, where they created a cycleway. So it was, I believe it was a road, so a vehicle road. They transitioned to a cycleway, and they used plastic to build that cycleway, which is just a great example for me because you're reusing material, it's wasted material, and you're creating a cycleway. So you're getting vehicles off the road as well. And I believe that was the GC who were pushing for that solution in that case. So I think if all of our owners could switch, that would have a huge impact. But it isn't just on owners. We have to meet in the middle. Everyone in the value chain has to start to push for these concepts.
Rick, you want to take a thought about that?
Yeah, I would, similar to what Elliot said, right? I would say both, absolutely both, right? Owners need to include, what they feel are appropriate and responsible sustainability requirements within their contracts that require, contractors or designers or architects, engineers to do certain things that are out there and available, right? And similarly, you know, contractors are obviously going to be doing the things that are in their financial interest. You know, so when things like electric construction equipment starts to become available, right? You know, the contractor is going to start to head that way too, because obviously if it's cheaper to operate a electric bulldozer or an electric excavator or electric crane than it is to fill it full of diesel, you know, every morning of every day of the week, you know, they're going to take that approach. So I think it has to come from both sides.
The final question I'll ask you is, and this one's to you, Rick, are you considering ISO 14001 for sustainable environmental protection?
So we don't currently do a whole lot within ISO standards, at least in terms of being ISO certified, but we do look at ISO standards and strive to achieve that level of service in a number of our different areas, like asset management and things of that nature. So while we're not striving, for example, to be you know, meet, and I can't remember the number, the ISO number for asset management, right? But while we're not striving to get certified necessarily, we are striving to meet, you know, the requirements that that certification would have, right? So obviously those are international standards and industry standards for a reason, right? And we want to be part and parcel to practicing the best practices that are out there.
Gents, thank you for your time. That was jam-packed 56, 57, 58 minutes of information and some solid Q&A. We appreciate both of your time. We know you guys are busy, and you guys have made a couple of appearances now, so we're grateful for both of you. And you know, Rick, I guess I will prompt you on this, and feel free to turn me down live if so. But like, if people want to learn more about what you guys are doing within your organization, where can they learn more? You're on mute.
Oh, sorry, MMSD.com, right? We have a great deal of information on MMSD.com. You can take that as far as you want, right? There's absolutely no shortage of information from our website. You can go down multiple different paths.
Great. Well, thank you both. Like I said in the beginning, you will receive a certificate of completion and participation for this webinar that will come in your email inbox. And finally, this webinar is available on demand on the eBuilder website. So if you want to send it to a colleague or reshare it with somebody else, you can do so. It will be uploaded in the next couple of days. But with that said, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. And folks, we appreciate you attending, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome.